morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Partner Webinar. This webinar this morning will take you through sort of the modern chef ecosystem. This is important for a lot of reasons. Chef's been around for about 10 years. And there have been people that have been using it for most of that time, but there's been a lot of innovation in the last year in particular. So it's a good opportunity to sort of bring folks up to speed and reintroduce them to Chef in some of the capabilities. So with that, here's meeting our team, Denise, Ranak, Kaylin, others that you may know. These are the folks that are providing lots of resources for our partners and making sure you get the latest and greatest. Excuse me, I have a bit of a frog in my throat. I'm John Tonello. I'm a technical marketing manager here at Chef, and what that means is I work very closely with the engineers here at Chef, and as new innovations come out, you'll see a lot of content that I create, everything from blog posts to screencasts and webinars like this, with the intent of really showing people practical ways to get engaged with Chef and using it, and particularly using new features or enhanced features. The presentation today is actually part one of a two-parter on the road to best practices. And today we'll be talking about understanding the Chef ecosystem, sort of all the moving parts, what's involved in developing and deploying cookbooks and policy files to do the kinds of things that Chef customers want to do. A big part of this is what we call compliance phase, which is really the full soup to nuts capability to not just configure instances on-prem or in the cloud, but to verify and audit those systems in real time. So I'll get started by talking about basic Chef terms, which haven't changed much, but we're doing away with some things, and as the topography of the landscape changes, we're becoming more and more in sync with how developers work and how companies use our products. I'll talk about the Chef ecosystem, and particularly Chef Automate and Chef Infra Server, and the Chef Workstation, which is where developers do their work. And then some detail on cookbooks, recipes, profiles, and policy files. Don't worry if you don't know what any of this means, because that's the purpose of this webinar, to walk you through some of that. And then we'll have a time at the end for Q&A. Now, as I mentioned before, this presentation is based on a Chef blog post that I recently updated and published just about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. And this road to best practices provides a lot of detail about what I'll be talking about today. Today, I'm sort of summarizing some of the key early concepts in that blog post, but it is a detailed hands-on how-to on a lot of these aspects. So for folks that are new to Chef in particular, or those who haven't used the most latest Chef, it'll be very eye-opening, I believe. So be sure to check out that blog post and freely share it. So one of the things I always like to do in talking about the, Chef, what is it exactly, and what are all the moving parts? And it can be complicated, particularly for folks that are brand new to the space. There are others that may be using competing products like Ansible or Puppet or Salt. And I'll talk about I'll sprinkle in some of the comparisons that way. But Chef is code-based infrastructure and compliance management, which means that you're describing things that you want on systems and describing the states that you want, and Chef does the work of making it happen, which dramatically accelerates the ability to manage not just a few systems, but hundreds or thousands of systems, no matter where they live, and understanding exactly the state that they're in and being able to share that code with the folks around the team and really collaborate around what your expected outcomes are. For developers, we sort of throw around the term chef repo. What's a chef repo? If you've used GitHub or any kind of source control manager, repo is a place where you store stuff. And it's the same in Chef. The chef repo is a directory that you create on your workstation. Developers creating basically a folder to store all their stuff. And it contains cookbooks, recipes, profiles, basically everything that a team or individual is working on in their environment. It's frequently synced up with something like GitHub or GitLab for source control, which enables a larger policy as code framework for any organization. So cookbooks, so if you think of it as in a hierarchy, you would create a chef repo directory. And when you do that using chef tools, it automatically creates a whole bunch of other files and subdirectories for you, including cookbooks. And cookbooks are, and obviously you'll notice that there's a cooking theme with Chef. Cookbooks are how chef code is organized within the repo. So each cookbook does something else, just like a recipe. In a cookbook, like you might have a cookbook of French cooking and a cookbook of American cooking, something like that. So in that sort of hierarchy. And within cookbooks are recipes, and recipes are, just like in a cookbook, are something that are part of that cookbook. We sort of use recipes and cookbooks interchangeably, and I'll show some examples of that a little bit later. But this example in this image is actually a short recipe. It's completely valid. It uses chef code, and you can see it's saying, if it's a Windows platform, stop, and in this case, enable or disable the Windows service called Spooler. And completely valid, but this is a recipe that would live within a cookbook, that would live within a chef repo. It's basically all the code that you're working with. Now, Chef uses the Chef client as an agent that runs on all the systems, whether they're Windows, Linux, or Mac. And there are actually some Unix-based versions as well. And the agent is what does all the work for the chef code. It interprets it. It knows how to install packages. It knows how to configure servers. It knows a whole wide range of things. And it runs in the background. Typically, it runs about every 30 minutes. And in that time period, it will check in with the Chef Infra Server that we'll talk about in a second. But the Chef client is doing all the mundane work, and it knows how to do those tasks regardless of the type of system. And cookbooks and recipes define what you want, and the client does the work and does the reporting as well, which is a critical piece. Where does this work happen? For developers, we have Chef Workstation, which is a free download, and it's a package that includes many other command line tools. This used to be known as Chef DK, which was deprecated at the end of 2020. Chef Workstation is a drop-in replacement for Chef DK, but it also includes a number of new and enhanced tools. And it's a good indicator, too, that if you come across an organization that's using Chef DK, some of their chef knowledge is a little dated, because Workstation is really the current and best way to be interacting with Chef. So on a workstation, it might be a laptop, it might be a tower, or whatever that happens to be. Again, Windows, Linux, or Mac, regardless. Developer installs Chef Workstation, and they get all these tools that you see on the right. CLI, there's Kitchen, which enables them to interact with the Infra Server. A bunch of tools, everything they need, frankly, to get started coding and testing and doing everything that they need to with Chef itself. Chef Workstation by itself can do a couple of things, but it's not by itself, the be all and end all. You need to have, in an enterprise environment, a chef server. So let's see, I have to make sure I'm in the right thing so we can page forward. The Chef Infra Server runs on a separate machine, usually alongside Chef Automate, which is a dashboard tool that we'll talk about in a minute. But the Chef Infra Server stores all the cookbooks and codes, the code, recipes, profiles, policy files, and information about each node. So think of it it's at the center, it's the keystone. You can have different developers working on their laptops using Chef Workstation. And when they push code, before it goes to a particular node to configure that node or see if it's in compliance, it sends it to the Chef Infra Server, and then the Chef Infra Server takes responsibility for pushing it out to all the nodes and then collecting information back from all of the nodes via the Chef client. All happens very seamlessly and quietly, but sort of behind the scenes. And it provides a lot of information about the nodes, so that everything in this example, I'm just searching a particular node by platform. In this case, looking at any node that happens to be running Ubuntu, and saying, show me all the shells that are installed. You could do this manually on a machine or one or two machines, but because Infra Server is collecting all this data, it makes it easy to pull, easy to verify information across hundreds or thousands of nodes all at one time. The search index is part of what drives the content in Chef Automate, but it's also viewable through the command line tools. Let's see. Chef Automate is a graphical UI dashboard, browser-based, that provides insights into everything that you're doing. So not only is it giving a pretty face to what's happening in Infra Server, it's showing you in real time the activity on all your nodes. So without having to run the command line, you can easily log into the dashboard, or different users can log into the dashboard with different permissions and see the status of nodes. They can view contents of cookbooks and profiles. They can look at the compliance. They can export audit reports of compliant and not compliant systems. And as I said, it's consuming Chef infrastructure server data behind the scenes, which is in turn collecting information from nodes. So there's a lot of information being pumped into these dashboards. And the idea being that you have a single pane of glass. It's very easy at a glance to see everything's good. Some things are bad. I know where to focus my resources and to look into where to fix things. At the same time, nowadays, test-driven development is a big part of any development workflow. And Chef Workstation comes with Test Kitchen, which is a tool to fully test Chef code, profiles, audit capabilities, all those things without a Chef Infra Server, without Automate, but right on a laptop or workstation using tools like Docker, spinning up sample nodes in Docker containers. You can integrate it with Vagrant and spin up sample nodes in locally and using virtual machines. You can integrate with AWS and Azure and use cloud instances for this testing. And Test Kitchen enables you to very quickly iterate through the process. So as a team is working independently but together, they can be testing their code long before they push it up to the Infra Server, and long before they push it into test, build, and dev environments that way. In addition to all these sort of in-house capabilities, Chef also oversees the Chef Supermarket, which is a publicly accessible repo of just thousands. And the last time I checked, late last week, there were about 4,000 user-created cookbooks that are ready to use. And what does that mean? That means that people who have a particular task they want to do, whether it's installing Redis or creating client runs or installing different packages, chances are good now in 2021 that someone has done that before. And they've made a cookbook and other content freely available. There are something like 80,000 contributors to the Chef Supermarket, including the chef engineers themselves. So you have curated content essentially within the supermarket that was created by Chef and publicly shared. You have cookbooks and content in the supermarket also that is done by users in our community. These are folks at all levels of in all different kinds of organizations. And there's a lot of content here. And the nice thing about the supermarket is you can actually go in and download content, but you can also include it directly into your own cookbooks without having to download it. And Chef knows, oh, I'm going to go out to the supermarket, grab that, make my particular compliance check that I'm working on or infrastructure configuration based on that, and it becomes part of your ecosystem. And it's a nice way to get started and a nice way to get a big jump on not having to start from scratch for a lot of tasks. So in looking at everything I just talked about, this is sort of the graphical representation of how Chef code moves through a workflow. You know, it all usually begins with something offline, right? Engineers and security folks, and developers and operations people are sitting down to talk about what is it exactly that we want on a system. You know, if it's a web server, what ports need to be opened and what permissions do we need to have? What packages need to be installed to make that happen? Developers then take those policies and, you know, I like to say non-digital sometimes content, you know, someone might have a spreadsheet or documentation somehow. They turn that into Chef code using the workstation tools and tools like, you know, VS Code or a typical IDE, the kind of smart shell and text environment that developers use. And with they're able to test it locally using Test Kitchen over and over again and make sure it works and does the things that they want to do. And then they push it to Chef Infra Server, and the Infra Server and the client work together to apply the Chef code. And then the reporting state, which is the data aggregation and validation that you saw in the Automate dashboard. I'll show some live examples of that in a minute. So the whole ecosystem is, you have the workstation, you have the Infra Server, and then you have nodes. So you have those three pieces. And if you think about the developer working in the middle, that individual is creating code, pushing up to the Infra Server. That Infra Server is pushing it to nodes over and over again. And then the nodes are reporting back to Infra Server, and the developer on the workstation is able to do that stuff. It is possible. There are what we call ad hoc commands that folks can run without installing Chef Infra Server, meaning you can create code and you can target some system either locally or remotely and run compliance. For folks who are using Ansible, for example, who may have configured their systems with Ansible, they can actually use Chef Inspect for the compliance bit using ad hoc commands like that as well. But that sort of outlines the idea of that developer using Workstation is in the middle and manipulating and managing these systems, leaning on Infra Server to do most of the work. So cookbooks, recipes, profiles, and policy files. Cookbooks, I talked about before, these hold multiple recipes and profiles and policy files. And this little example here shows using the Windows service, which is the part in the light blue. There are more than 150 Chef resources like that, including like creating users or simplified, installing packages for different types of OSs, everything you can possibly think of. For a lot of these macro tasks are incorporated into Chef resources. And so a recipe like this includes one or more resources. And, in this case, this Windows service spooler, if you go into any Windows machine, Windows server, and if you think about, okay, where would I go to find Windows services? Okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to go into that particular menu in the control panel, and I can disable it and do some of those things. Chef knows how to do that programmatically, basically using the same kinds of techniques that PowerShell would use in a Windows machine. But it also knows how to do similar things on Linux and Mac automatically. Generators that a developer will use on Workstation don't just create folders for all this stuff to be held, but create all the additional files that they need when they're creating recipes and templates for websites or other kinds of content. It's very straightforward then for them to assemble everything they need into a working policy as code architecture. The other side of recipes and cookbooks are profiles. And profiles use controls, which there are a couple hundred of these available as well. Not the control thing at the top, that's just where it says print spooler. That's just a name I've given this control, but I'm able to describe the service. And controls basically look like this. They are named. They do some particular thing. In this case, I want to make sure that the print spooler is not enabled and not running. And this is a common remediation for the print nightmare bug that was out there. One of the solutions is just disable your print spooler on machines that don't need print services, and you're good. So in a case like this, the control is the other half of the recipe. So the recipe is doing the work. It's shutting down the service. It's making sure it's not enabled. And then the control from the profile is verifying that fact. And we always like to say, you're not checking if Chef is doing its thing, because you can have confidence in that, and our customers have confidence in that, but you're checking your logic. Particularly if you have multi-system, multi-platform cookbooks, you want to make sure that they're doing the right thing to your logic that meets your infrastructure and policy as code. And controls tell you both from the command line and through automate if things are in compliance. Together, we call this the compliance phase, which is someone's not just doing infrastructure stuff with recipes, and not just doing compliance things. They're doing the whole soup to nuts, right? So they're combining what we call Chef Infra and Chef Inspect to give a solid outcome in compliance. Policy files and have been recently enhanced to bring all of the previous pieces together. And the nice thing about that is, particularly in a secure environment, and you have multiple people contributing code, you want to make sure that there are no man in the middle. Someone's putting code that shouldn't be in a particular recipe to impact hundreds of machines. You want to know that it has a version and it hasn't been altered between the time someone developed and tested it to the time it's made it to the actual nodes to do its work. So policy files actually bundle together cookbooks, profiles, attributes, a bunch of other information, push it up to the Infra Server where it can be reached by the nodes, and they become immutable objects, meaning that if they change, they need to be fully changed, and their revisions are stamped, so you can lock in on certain versions of policy files. You can set some up for a test environment, say, and different ones later in the process for production environments and that sort of thing. But policy files are a very fast and effective way to link multiple cookbooks into a single sort of task or policy that you want to achieve. And then the information is reported out through Infra Server and Chef Automate. So this is what we talk about as policy as code. You're beginning with an idea of how you want to configure something, what success looks like, and from the compliance side, certain ports are closed, certain users exist or don't exist, certain packages are installed. It's a big part of the security profile, right? Because everybody wants to make sure that their systems are safe and that they're open just enough to do the work that they do. For example, a web server may only need port 443 open and not anything else. So, you're really looking at a lot of different ways to secure everything that you have through the code. And the compliance phase gives you the confidence to do that. It's a very big sort of core concept of where Chef is today. And of course, DevOps teams that are doing this work together and trying to make sure stuff that's tested and built works the same way in production and is secure and proven to be secure and in compliance at the end of that. I'm going to quickly stop this share to do another share. And hopefully you can see that. This is the Chef dashboard in Automate. So I logged in and my Automate server is called automate.chef.lab. And this is just the overview page on infrastructure. And you can see I have 4 different nodes in here. I have a Raspberry Pi, a couple of Ubuntu boxes, and Windows box. And I can see in this just simple view, it's blue, 4 nodes, everything is passed. I can see a lot more detail if I click into the actual Infra Server and the organization that my code is currently housed in. And I can see the different cookbooks that I have in here. I can also see the nodes themselves here. I can see policy files that I've applied. But the cookbooks in this example, this is a simple cookbook that tells the Chef client to run every 30 minutes. And this code, developed using Chef Workstation tools, I uploaded this to the Infra Server, and it makes it available, so I can see it in here. And this is the same code that I would see as a developer. If I go over, this is my Chef Workstation IDE using VS Code. Here's my client run in the recipe and this default recipe that I have. And you can see this is the original code. And I uploaded it to the Infra Server using Knife, which is one of the tools in Workstation. And I can see all that information here. See, this is a simple example, but I can see the logic that's been built into here for Windows and everything else. So on Windows, it'll create a Windows task to do this particular running of the Chef client. And on everything else, meaning Linux in my case, it'll use cron to do that and apply it. If I had a web server or something else that had base files like base index.html pages or something like that, I could have templates. I could also have configuration files for setting up things like MySQL or Redis integrations. But everybody with access to Automate can view this, or at least those who I've given permission to. So there's role-based access control based on projects in Automate. So I can grant read-only view to certain aspects, so people across the team, not just the developers, can look at this content. If I go back to my cookbooks, I can look at the clients and the nodes. And in this case, I have the same nodes you saw before. I can see my Raspberry Pi is in here. Oh, doesn't like that. Doesn't like that either. I think it's because I haven't created a policy group in here. But anyway, here's that policy group. These are the policies that are associated with it in the policy files. And these policy files link together, in this case, 3 different cookbooks all in one policy file with a revision ID that's stamped on it, so I can tell, what version am I running of this, and I can see a history. So if, I haven't made changes to this particular group of this run list, and there are more revisions there, I know something's not right. Under compliance, and of course, there's a nice big blue banner here that says everything is in compliance. I can see a timeline. I had a problem here in red before everything was working. But I can look at the nodes. I can look at and filter by what's happening with them. I can look at the profiles that I have applied. In this case, here's that print spooler profile. And I can see everything is good running with that. But in addition to the profiles that I create, users can also use this whole ecosystem to use available profiles, and we use CIS profiles that set basic benchmarks for a wide variety of systems. And you can see there's 501 of these, and each one of these are fairly big. Let's see, I'll find one. Here's a CentOS 8 benchmark, and these are profiles similar to the basic control version that I did, and each one of these is articulated here. The control is called this. It's got a very long name, and these are based on the CIS standard. And in this particular profile has 188 controls that can be tested. And then we provide for customers, paid customers, remediation cookbooks. So you could imagine that if I ran this CentOS 8 benchmark on some raw CentOS machine, I'm gonna get a lot of errors because I haven't done any configuration. Or I may get 100 errors, but 88 things are fine. A developer can go through and create that content in recipes and in various cookbooks to solve all those problems. Or if they're a paid customer, they can get cookbooks that are pre-created that they can just apply that match these profiles to give them all blue across the line and make sure that they're everything is in compliance. Compliance is sort of, where everything comes together. It knows that there are different nodes in here. It knows that they're passed. It knows how often each of these Chef client runs happened. It knows whether they made or didn't make the profile. And you can see each one of these things describes in plain language, again, the descriptions that I placed in those controls themselves. But really at a glance, you can see quite a bit of information. And you can slice and dice, if you have a lot of different systems, and some have a prefix called web because they're web servers, or Redis because they're Redis database servers, you can go in there. And you can create scan jobs as well and go through and choose, say, all of your web servers and apply a profile, a compliance scan for those, run a scan, and you can actually export from those the results. And of course, we have settings as well that include notification integrations. So users aren't just, okay, I've done my code by myself, I pushed it up, I ran it on a few things. what happens when there's an error. I can look at Automate, but maybe my team uses Slack or it uses ServiceNow. Notifications can be integrated and sent to those as well as part of a broader workflow. But all these pieces are working together. So the Chef client is doing its thing. It's applying the cookbooks and recipes and then collecting data. It's sending it to the Infra Server. It's sending it to Automate to view visually. And it can also then Automate can share it elsewhere in that ecosystem in the flow. So there's quite a bit of activity that's going on behind the scenes here in the Automate dashboard that rolls it up very nicely and cleanly. And you can see I have this running every 30 minutes. So as I've been talking, it's run on these nodes and they're still in compliance. Everything is good on each one of these and they're working properly. And I can see even in more detail all the capabilities that are being applied to these particular nodes in slicing and dicing. I'm just going to stop my share quickly again. I'm doing it slowly and deliberately so I share the right screen with you. So hopefully that's giving you an idea of, where folks get started, how these pieces work together, how, the workstation is the place where code originates really, but the Infra Server is managing all that code and providing revision stamps and immutability and sharing that information through the Automate dashboard. The Chef client is doing its thing on a regular schedule to ensure everything is in compliance, that everything that you want to be applied is being applied. And of course, nothing stands still. So whatever I might push out as a configuration today, I might want to change tomorrow. And this is where Chef and its scalability really come into play. If there's a security problem like that print spooler, and you want to make that applied to thousands of machines right now because it's a threat, all I'd have to do is make a single change to one cookbook and one profile, perhaps, push that out to the Infra Server. Next time each one of those Windows machines checks in, they'll now be corrected and I'll see compliance in blue on the Automate dashboard, and in my CLI checks, I'll see green. But that's really the long-term value. It's not just what you're doing on the day that you deploy a system, but how do you maintain it over time? And policy as code enables users of Chef to do that across the board. I'm not sure if we have questions here.
Yes, John, I'm checking. At the moment, there are no open questions. But anyways, thank you so much for a solid 40-minute presentation on the basics.
Yeah, and I'll just add, check out the companion blog post to this presentation, which is the chef.io/blog, and it's Chef 101, A Road to Best Practices. And it goes into a lot of detail on how to actually implement the kinds of things I've just been talking about in a lot of detail, and using the latest policy file workflows, which are very powerful and speedy for doing a lot of the things that I was just talking about.
Yes, I've added the link to the blog in the chat box. I'll make sure that it's included in the the presentation email that we'll be sending. And with that, I hope all the attendees found information and value. And thanks again for attending today's webinar, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye.